the things that Tony's a great writer, and he's got just some great stories, great anecdotes that go all the way back into the 90s before he was at Apple. But it's also just so rare to get a look under the hood at Apple because they are so famously private. A book I've recently read, a nonfiction book that's not strictly in my, around this sort of business, is something called Being You by Anil Seth. And it's a book on consciousness and sort of neuroscience and kind of what the state of the art looks like there. Found the book just utterly fascinating. Recommend it for anybody who's interested in topics like that.
Something that triggered me while you were talking about it is the secrecy that Apple has. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing for the large conglomerates to keep their secrecy? Is that part of the secret sauce of Apple?
Hard to say. I don't think there are too many companies that could pull that off. I mean, there's just sort of a culture of discipline that has been, part of that place, really since the beginning. So I think there are probably a lot of companies out there that would like to be a little bit more secret about how they do things, but they're just, not able to hold it together. So they're really kind of a rare phenomenon. You don't really see it happening, too much. And whether or not it's part of their success, hard to say. I mean, I think Apple, in the last couple of years, I think they're a little bit of shine is coming off of it. There's a bit more. They could sort of do no wrong. Almost anywhere. I mean, everybody really loves them, but certain aspects of, especially how they're treating their developer audience and things like that, it's beginning to look a little bit more like a Death Star than it was before.
Do you feel in that sense? Because I think that Apple indeed is a very interesting example. Do you feel that people buy their products because of the products and what the products actually can do? Or is that they buy an image, if you will?
I think with Apple, there is a certain amount of brand and belonging and, kind of where the brand space that they occupy, that people do want to identify with it. And I think the other reason is just the tightness of the experience that comes from how vertically integrated most of it is, specifically the hardware and the OS, kind of how all that stuff works together. Their integration and their kind of walled community, it does lock you out of bringing things in from a lot of other places, but things are just tight. Things just work together. That's also beginning to, I don't know about you, but my experience as an Apple consumer, that's not what it used to be. And we're kind of into a little bit different space than maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. But I would put it up to those two things: experience and brand.
Yeah, Jim, go.
No, I was just thinking about, because I'm an Apple user, not a fanboy, not a power user, but I got a phone, an iPad, and a MacBook. I also have some Windows stuff, and I thought I was kind of thinking about, is the luster off? I don't know. I do think my next laptop will not be a MacBook. I got my initial MacBook in probably, I don't know, 2008, because I was tired of feeling like I only knew one language, like I could only write with my right hand. I wanted to become ambidextrous because I was working in business, and it almost felt like back in the day when my parents said, hey, you got to learn to drive a stick because you never know when you're going to need to. And people to this day, like even as recently as last week, are like, well, what do you mean you have a Windows computer and a MacBook? And it almost feels like I'm not loyal, like I'm not being loyal to either brand. I'm like, right. I love them both, just for different reasons.
Yeah. I get that. I've had that same. I'm pretty much the same as you, right? There are a lot of products, Apple products in my house, but it's not that I just go Apple first all the time. If there is something that I think is better, I'll certainly bring that in and kind of tolerate a little bit of the lack of integration in my own ecosystem. And there have been periods, especially when I was back, before I joined Silicon Valley Product Group, I had a product at a mobile company, and there was a period there where I had 3 phones that I was carrying around, different operating systems. And part of it, I approached it the way you're saying. It's like I feel like I need to have a few more skills. I feel like to really speak knowledgeably on this stuff, I need to go deep on multiple things. I have to say though, every time I followed that urge, I was always I got over it really quickly. It's like, okay, I did that. I'd spent 48 hours on, whatever, this or that phone. And it's like, it just really didn't feel as tight for me. And I was definitely somebody who appreciated kind of all the little hiccups being ironed out, especially with something as personal as a phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it indeed that the ecosystem that these days is a lot more important, because we have a lot of stuff that's coming at us, right? And I can imagine, I'm very curious about your perspective, having a single ecosystem where you don't have to accept all those little hiccups just lowers the amount of cognitive load that we have.
True, but as you're saying this, I'm realizing that I do have multiple ecosystems that I'm participating in. I do have a lot of Apple gear around here. I've got a lot of Google stuff, and I've got a lot of one-off things that are neither of those, even in cases when either Apple or Google or both are offering something competitive. So and it's tough. It's tough to keep track of it. I recently hit that crossover point. How you relate to how your parents relate to technology, and you're always a little bit annoyed with them that they aren't trying these things out, or they don't quite get that this is how you do it. I really have just noticed in the last 6 months, I have now become that guy to my kids. I was hanging in there for a long time, technical background and working in tech, but just kind of keeping track of all the complexities within an ecosystem, across these ecosystems. I'm now the old man. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen to all of us.
Unfortunately, well, yeah. I got to say, in that regard, my dad, he's almost 75 now. He adopted his first smartphone earlier this year. And up until that point, I think I received 5 different videos from him, all lasting multiple minutes today. He's restoring this old Navy vessel, right? It's his hobby. It's one of the few things that he can actually still properly do, and he's very proud of that. But he keeps sending these videos. It's sweet, but also like very old at the same time. And up until that point, he had a very old school Nokia where all the paint was already rubbing off. The whole thing was falling apart. But he continued because he could not keep up with how these smartphones work. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, good for your dad. That's not a lot of 75-year-olds have that kind of courage.
Definitely true.
Chris, is the Sonos issue that's currently in the news almost daily for me, is that on your radar?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. No. So here's the thing, though. So I'm also a big Sonos customer. I may own 6 or 8 products, from Sonos, and know the company reasonably well. The debacle was really about the app, a big refresh they did of the app, and lost ground in some places, and tweaked some people as far as what the experience is. So it's on my radar from a news perspective, but it's not on my radar from an actual experience perspective, because I really wasn't using the app. I was always just casting directly from, I was either using a voice interface for it, or I was casting directly from Spotify. Spotify has linkages into and it's not even really a cast. I mean, it's actually participating directly in, effectively you can use the Sonos app, the Spotify app as your front end to Sonos. So I haven't really gone in and figured out what it is people are so upset about, but you do, as a product person, you have to be very, very careful when you've got an audience that loves you, and an audience that has created a whole, infrastructure within their house that is most likely took them a little while to set up, and their ways of interacting with it, they've gotten into some real habits. If you're going to go and dramatically change something like that, you have to have a very good reason, and B, you have to manage that experience of getting somebody migrated from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. So I know your question was, is it on my radar? So I guess that's a yes, but I wouldn't say that I have personally directly felt it, because it didn't mess with the way that I used Sonos in any real significant way.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is when we see headlines like that, given what the three of us do, and I'm not saying we do the same thing, but we're in a generally similar sphere. And then CrowdStrike, a lot has been said on LinkedIn about, oh, this is an early indicator of a problem. And this is the problem of letting certain vendors get too close to this, or being, too loyal to an ecosystem, and having diversity and resiliency and all those things. So when things like CrowdStrike or the Sonos stuff starts to hit your average consumer, not just the tech community, when you and Marty sit around, do you talk about, like, what is this an indicator of? Is this an indication of something? Is this an inflection point, or are you just readers and consumers like the rest of us?
Oh, I see. Interesting. I kind of put these into different categories. So I don't know, maybe I'm not quite seeing the connection yet. Sonos, I think, is absolutely an example of what I think we are all about here. That was a failure in product discovery. The fact that there was always going to be a risk, right? Whenever you bring something out, whether it's a small feature or a complete redesign of an app or a new product, there is a whole constellation of risks and ways that this can fail. Some of them have to do with, is it bringing value? Some of them have to do with, do we really know what it takes to around the technical feasibility? Some of it relates to the business. And if we were to put this out there, is it going to interfere with how we go to market? And then this one, I think in the case of Sonos, was really one of experience. Did it actually work for people and their own cognitive models, to sort of consume the value of the product? And the bar was particularly high on Sonos because there was already a rabid fan base that was used to a particular experience. So to go in and disturb that so profoundly, they also, you could argue that there were some value risk problems too, because it went out actually with fewer capabilities. And these were certain capabilities that I don't know if it's a large part of their audience cared about or just a vocal part of their audience, but they got burned on both of those. And that's classic product fail, right? Those are things that really should be worked through in terms of talking with customers, in terms of showing them prototypes and kind of figuring out, looking at data, and understanding all of the implications of the choices that you're making and where all those risks are. So that one definitely fits there. The CrowdStrike one is a little bit trickier. That one, there was clearly just a sort of a normal breakdown here. Whether it was a breakdown in regression testing or just what. This is something that Microsoft et al. And even CrowdStrike as well. They've done this tens of thousands of times now, with a very, very large ecosystem. So clearly something broke down just in the process. I think one of the things, though, that you're asking about is when you've got so much brittleness and so much interdependency, within a particular ecosystem, does it make it inevitable that something like this is going to happen? And I would say those are interesting questions, but they may be a little far afield from the types of things I would be talking with Kagan about on a regular basis. Who knows, though? We haven't actually had a conversation on it, so there may be something interesting. I'm curious, though, did that get at anything I just said there? Get at kind of the essence of your question, or is there kind of a point that you're looking for, an observation you've made?
Hell, Chris, I don't know if I ever have a point, but I'll tell you how in my brain these things are connected. So as CrowdStrike was going on, I was reading the book Seeing Around Corners. And something that hit home as I'm literally out doing yard work and listening to this book and seeing messages from friends and others dealing with the real effects of CrowdStrike, it kind of led me to realize you have to first put yourself in a position to see an inflection point or a change in the bigger picture. And then you have to know what you're seeing and you have to know what to do with that signal you're getting. So I think both of those are ways of saying, do we see a risk here? So if you are fully invested in the Sonos ecosystem, when they make a mistake or stumble, a big mistake, it has a really, like, if I wanted to bundle up all my Sonos gear and stick it on Facebook Marketplace, I could wash my hands of Sonos. But then what if I go to work the next day and say, hey, IT administrator, hey, leader, hey, CIO, what are we doing to prevent something that like just happened from happening again in another part of our business or a similar part of business? Because I didn't have such a visceral reaction to the technical side of CrowdStrike myself, but I understood and heard from many people that says, see, this is the problem. This is the problem of being too dependent on a single platform, or like, look at when Teams goes down, half the world stops, or when, you know, whatever. And all of these things are ecosystems. Apple, we talked about, Sonos, you know, you could see CrowdStrike as being an ecosystem or a putting all your eggs in one basket issue, even though, like you said, the root cause there is very different. So I guess I'm just wondering if any of these things add up when you're sitting around thinking about stuff to a change in consumer behaviors to wanting the products we use to be more open from an ecosystem standpoint. Like if you had told me when I started my tech career in the late 90s that I'd be able to do on a Mac with Microsoft Office, I would have said, no way in hell is that going to happen. There's no way. Because back then, I mean, it felt like Gates versus Jobs, right? And now the lines are blurring. iMessage is the last big thing for me. If I can somehow consume and use and respond to iMessages on my Windows PC, I will feel as a consumer, I can make the best choice for me in any reason. Now, that's my issue. Other people may have other things that keep them in or out of a certain group. But so I guess the root of my question is, are any of these things connected to consumer behaviors, product development, or am I
Interesting? Yeah.
not seeing
As you're
something?
talking here, the framing that seems to make sense here is sort of one of kind of, we'll call it redundancy versus sort of, you know, centralization, or you know, redundancy versus standardization, right? That's what it comes down to. And standardization gives you the obvious benefits of things working, you having to be less trained up on lots of stuff. There's a much simpler ecosystem that you as a consumer or as a CIO, whatever, have to maintain. But it comes at the cost of this brittleness. And you know, when and where does it make sense to inject redundancy? You know, where, or you know, just differences. You know, lack of consistency, so that you actually can tolerate these things. And also in the case of CrowdStrike, you can limit the blast radius of, you know, of any sort of failure. And I'm not sure there's, you know, a single, you know, one of those is always best. You know, I think there's probably thinking of it as a spectrum and deciding where you want to anchor yourself on that spectrum, given the nature of the risk. Like, you know, again, like I still don't really see these as that similar. I mean, I think this framing works really well for IT infrastructure and stuff like that. When there is, if you can identify a single point of failure, like what happened with CrowdStrike, that's perhaps a place that you do want to look at your ecosystem and see if there are ways to keep the blast radius smaller. In the case of Sonos, the reason why I feel like it's a little bit different is I don't know if the right answer to preventing that problem would have been more diverse ecosystems on the part of the customers. You know, I think people who were fans of the Sonos products, even if you just had one tool, right? You just had one, you know, whatever, one standalone bookshelf speaker, you'd probably be just as upset with that company right now if it was one of your favorite products. So I'm not sure that I see Sonos's troubles right now as one of a monolithic ecosystem or a standardized ecosystem. I see that one as just straight up, lack of really understanding the implications of what you're going to put out into the market.
Yeah, it really depends as well, I guess. Jen's favorite word, it depends on how you use the product. Because you can use this is the true consultant answer. Huh?
Exactly, exactly.
You can use the Sonos app and to control it. But personally, I use Spotify most 9 times out of 10, and I can just select the speaker there from that point on, continue and blast my music or whatever podcast I'm listening to on that speaker. So I don't need the Sonos interface to actually control the thing. So it really depends on how you use it. But there are a plethora of these kind of examples right now.
Right. Exactly. And I'm exactly like you, right? That's why the Sonos thing hit me mostly from reading the news and not as, as a Sonos customer.
No, exactly. But there are a plethora of these kind of examples at the moment. Like Nvidia, I think it was yesterday where they completely, I think it was $270 billion in net worth that they lost. So it's going up and down at the moment, and with very popular organizations, popular frameworks as well. Right. Agile is going down at the moment. New buzzwords start to rise, and that's my segue into the product operating model. Product is the new thing. Product management, product operating model. Tell us what it is and how we can actually leverage it.
Yeah. So product operating model, I actually don't think it's very new. I think maybe that term is new. It's really just been in the last year and a half, 2 years that more and more of the industry is coalescing around that actual label. But the concepts in there are things that SVPG, my firm, has been really talking about for 20 years. So the way we break it up at the highest level, it really comes. So first of all, just looking at an operating model, we can start from there. As what do we mean by an operating model? It's really internally to a company. How are you organized? How are you organized functionally? How are you organized cross-functionally? And how do you generally get things done? In terms of products, how do you decide what to build and then ultimately get that stuff built? So, there are many, many different ways. If you were to just go and look at your own company and you were to answer those questions, how does all that stuff happen? You're really describing an operating model. And one of the things that Silicon Valley Product Group recognized really early is that there were kind of two classes of company, especially on the real tech forward companies, at least early on. The companies that we saw that were just routinely doing amazing stuff in terms of creating value on behalf of their customers were just organized differently. They were doing things internally that were different. They weren't all exactly the same, mind you, but there were some core principles that were really quite different from how sort of the rest of the companies operated. And at the highest level, it really came down to what was the sort of motivating incentive engine inside of the company. What was it that people saw their job as? In the legacy models, it was primarily around output. Are we releasing on time? How many features? Did we get through the P0 and P1 requirements in the roadmap? All of those sorts of things is really like, if you're an engineer, that's what you're occupied with. That's how your manager is measuring you. That's what the business is looking to you to provide. It's all about output. If you really think it through, though, and you can imagine a company, a product and tech organization that's just awesome as far as output, they can still be building all the wrong things and not really moving the company forward at all, right? So that's really one of the big insights on the product model. The product model creates incentives and forces and measurement and all of this around outcome. So what is the thing that you're trying to achieve by shipping this particular product or this particular feature? And it might be a revenue-based outcome, or it might be other financial things, cost, whatnot, but it might be something else. It might be about customer acquisition, or it might be improving how long it takes to onboard a new customer, onboard a new partner into the system. All of those sorts of things can be outcomes, and there's really, sky's the limit on outcomes. But the whole point of the product operating model is that it frames things and it expects things of people around outcomes. Now, So this is all just words, right? But when you really try and put that into practice, you realize that a lot of behavior necessarily has to change. And in some cases, the types of people who are working at the company may not be, people who are really good at output may not be the ones who are going to be the, all the same people who you want to actually aim at these outcome oriented, approaches. So that's the highest level. We're moving from output to outcome. In doing that, though, there's still a lot of altitudes that you can be operating at. And I'll do these really quickly. The first one is kind of the one that most people think of. It's how do you build? How are your engineering teams organized? How often are you shipping? How well is your product instrumented when you actually put it into the field, into the market, into whatever it's, your a bunch of users or a bunch of customers or whatever, right? It's the how you build part. The second dimension is how do you solve problems? And what this means is, what is the unit of work that's allocated onto teams? Is it a feature to be built or a roadmap to be executed on, as most of us are used to? Or is it a problem that needs to be solved? And furthermore, if we're going to give a team a problem to solve, we're actually going to empower that team to decide what the best solution to that problem is, right? And that's a big, big step. And naturally, once you do that, what that team does in order to be successful is very, very different than what it does to be successful in the output regime. So that's the second. First was, how you build. The second one is how you solve problems. The third level is really getting to overall, kind of leadership and the relationship between, quote unquote, the business parts of the company and the technology parts of the company. It's who decides what problems to solve? How do you decide what problems to solve? And really, this speaks much more to having a cohesive product strategy. Most companies really don't have one. They've got a lot of different initiatives that they're working on at any given point. They've gone through a big prioritization sort of exercise in order to get us down to these 50 initiatives, and we're going to dole that out all into the teams. When you truly have a product strategy, it looks a lot different. It's not really coming directly from the individual businesses. It's more the actual product organization itself, product and tech, that are deciding these are the places we're focusing on, and they're going to do it in a way that works with the business. So a lot behind all three of these things that I said, but that's the fundamental cut at the product operating model. How you build, how you solve problems, how you decide what problems to solve.
There's a lot to unpack here, but I want to go back to the first thing that you mentioned. You've been talking about this together with SVPG for 20 years now. What is it that makes it become more popular in the last year and a half, 2 years?
Yeah, boy, that's an interesting question. I would say, well, first of all, I've seen it become popular as sort of waves of industries, right? There are certain industries that are, that kind of cop to this, and we'll see, a lot of inbound interest, to SVPG for, working with us that'll cluster around certain industries. And, early on, obviously, it was the tech companies, the ones who were actually selling technology. Now it's really kind of all manner of company, many of them, from big legacy industries. So we've seen it, but I think it's beginning to really start to reach a groundswell across a lot of industries. And I think it's sort of a collective fed upness with the fact that companies are spending a huge amount of money on technology, and they're not really seeing a lot of returns for what it is that they're spending. And I think this is becoming much more a part of the conversation. And more now, there's, it's a tipping point. More and more are realizing, CFOs are talking to one another and saying, okay, look, we've been funding all these projects. We get nothing out of these projects. What are you doing? And then they're saying, well, we've actually changed our financing model a little bit in order to really be a lot more product forward. We've got durable teams, for example, that are responsible for different aspects of our portfolio. We're putting a lot more of this whole idea of product discovery in here so that the teams can actually go out and try these ideas much, much earlier, in many cases before they build anything. So yeah, I think it's I think as I'm kind of working this answer out, there's been a bit of a tipping point that's happened.
Do you think that has to do as well with the fact that let's go with Scrum because it's in my title here below. These kind of models, frameworks, methodologies, wherever you want to go with, whether it's Scrum or something else, in many cases are very locally implemented. So in other words, maybe just a team does it, or at best a department or a collection of teams. And if I hear you talk about the product operating model, it's more throughout the entire organization rather than like a very small part of it.
It's possible, and we've certainly had somewhat of that progression as well. I mean, we've been telling the story up and down the organization, but even just looking at the SVPG books, Inspired really focuses at the altitude of individual teams. It's sort of akin to Scrum teams. And Empowered starts to focus at the larger product organization as a whole. So kind of all of engineering together with all of product management together with all of design and that sort of thing. And now the Transformed book, our latest one, really is focusing on the whole company and what does it mean for the product organization to relate to the rest of the company. So I think there is a certain maturation that's happened. All of these things have been out there, but there's been a bit of a bottoms up understanding of the concepts.
Jim, what's your thought?
Well, it's only been about the last 5 years that I've had the benefit of being able to sit down with a few CFOs in a non-work setting and ask about stuff. And I guess I was late to the party to realize that most of them are not required or incentivized or looking at how money is spent. They've told me themselves, I'm more of a chief accounting officer. Like I'm making sure that the money is being spent in the right place and that people are doing what they should with the money and all that. But so when they ask what I do, I talk about what I do. And I tend to think in terms of investments and experiments and what's a quick hypothesis we can go test, et cetera. And I ask them, do you think about as you're allocating budget to go solve a problem? And they're like, oh, that's not my job. So I'm curious, when you mentioned CFOs earlier, who are you seeing in a lot of your clients as the one who says, I'm the one or part of the group who is looking at where are we investing? Who are we giving a problem to solve? How are we funding them? Are there any patterns that you're seeing?
There's a couple. It used to be driven. I might take a slightly different run at the question, but hopefully an answer that will drop out of this. It's sort of where's the center of gravity for transforming to this operating model, and the things that it entails. And for a long time, it used to be the most senior people within the product and tech organization. So if there was a CPO, it might be the CPO, or it might be a CTO, or it might be the combination of those people. And they would kind of start the work, and at the same time that they were really kind of educating their respective departments within the company on how to work this way, they're also evangelizing it outside of that broader organization. And ultimately it does that has to include the CFO. The CFO may not be an eager initial participant in all of this, and these ideas are going to be quite foreign to a sorry, did I say CTO? I meant CFO. Was I saying that? Okay, so yeah, the CFO, right? So the ideas are oftentimes very foreign to to the typical CFO who's used to seeing an ROI, a business case. We're going to spend this much money, we're going to get this much money, we're going to hold you accountable, we'll build the team, and we'll get these returns from all of this. That's what they're used to, and it kind of makes logical sense, especially for somebody who thinks of themselves as a chief accounting officer. More and more, we are seeing these projects being driven from above, like in some cases, even the CEO, right? The CEO is the one who's saying, look, this is not working. Whatever it is we're doing with technology is not working. And clearly, just looking around at our competitors, looking around at our valuation, this is the thing that is going to need to change. So, they may deputize their head of product to go out and figure this out, but the energy is coming from there. And in some cases, CFOs, I have seen a couple of them where they're getting wind of these ideas first and realizing that so many of the seeds of an output-based culture are planted right with the funding model, right? The funding model necessarily puts you into this top-down output-based operating model. And to really undo that, you're going to have to get all the way to the funding model. So, I kind of rambled a bit to get there, but I hopefully that got at your question.
No, it's helpful. Thank you.
So let's take a pragmatic approach or practical approach. How, if organizations and practitioners are now listening, how can they start by implementing this model?
Yeah. So, obviously there are a lot of, it depends, of course, on this, but let's just start with the size, of the organization. If you are, of any sufficient size, this is not going to be an easy undertaking. It's not going to be the sort of thing where it's like, okay, I can go read a couple of books and, bring in a couple of coaches and instantly we're going to be transformed. Usually what you want to do is find some area that is, reasonably well set up for this, one that you can get organized around durable teams, one where the teams can be realistically set into motion to figure out solutions to outcomes. The teams are staffed with the right sorts of people. The teams have the right sorts of experience, or at the very least training on what product discovery actually looks like. And then the leaders really, provide the air cover on those teams to help ensure that they can work this particular way. And you do that for a quarter or two. And along the way, hopefully you're stumbling upon some innovations that wouldn't have otherwise been generated by the rest of the operating model. You're evangelizing what's working. You're evangelizing the fact that we've now devolved accountability for outcomes down into these teams. So it's not just your business stakeholders who are responsible for the outcomes. These other people are on the hook with them, and therefore they're doing a lot better work. They're approaching the work really, really differently. So you begin to harvest these wins and get the attention of your executives, get the attention of other people who want to be working this way. And then you spread it, to other places. So the short answer, I'm having a hard time finding short answers for you guys today. Sorry about that.
Good, I appreciate it.
The short answer for this executive is you go deep with a smaller number of teams rather than going shallow with a larger number of people.
I like it. Thank you very much. There's a question coming from the audience as well. So keep the long answers going because I really appreciate them. Are there any examples of companies that have adopted the product operating model and have reasonable success with it?
Yeah, and sorry, this probably sounds like shameless promotion, but we profile a number of them in the latest book and in the Transformed book. So and the thing about this is, obviously these things are quite private, confidential. So we had to get the right sorts of permission to talk about these. But just to give you a couple of examples that are written about in the book, there's the company Trainline. So Xander, I know you're in continental Europe. If you've ever used that to purchase train tickets, that's a UK-based company. They went through a pretty significant transformation that's documented in the book. And not only does it talk about a lot of the outcomes and the real value that was created as a result of doing this, it talks about certain innovations that were enabled that nobody at the company could have possibly even imagined coming to based on their old operating model. We do a pretty big download case study on Adobe, specifically when they did their transformation from the Creative Suite to the Creative Cloud. That actually is pretty well known in the industry. And it was before people were using terminology like product operating model and even transformation, but that's exactly what Adobe did. It had a huge unlock in value and market cap. There's another company that we go through called DataSite, which is a B2B company based in Minneapolis in the United States. Some of the things that they did. We've of course worked with many other companies, some of which you know, some of which you wouldn't know, but those are the ones that we got permission to write about in depth.
So I hope the answer has been the question has been answered sufficiently. Looking at the audience as well, and a follow-up question coming from the same person: what would the C-suite of an ideal product organization look like? I think that's a very interesting question.
The C-suite of a company that's transformed to the product model, is that the question, or is it the C-suite of the? Because that's really the C-suite is going to be at the company level, and we've got a company that's running against the product operating model. And if that is indeed the question, I would say there really isn't an ideal, other than you do need to have somebody nominally at the kind of most senior level of product management and of engineering. And a lot of times there is somebody who is quite senior, maybe peered to those people around product design. Now, a really large company may actually have this replicated across multiple business units, but we'll just talk about a single business unit company. You typically are going to need leaders, and in most cases, I do see them in the C-suite. At the very least, the head of technology is in the C-suite, and I do ideally like to see the head of product management and the head of technology being peered to one another. That's really the nature of product. But this is more ideal than required. There are certainly ways to work around org charts that aren't necessarily exactly compliant with what I just described.
Would you recommend, when we're starting with the implementation or the adoption or whatever you want to call it, with the product operating model, that we actually pair the two of them up to immediately create the most ideal scenario?
Yeah, so one of the real things about the product model is just the amount of collaboration that it's looking to create, cross-functional collaboration specifically, not just employee collaboration, but specifically product managers, engineers, and designers. And kind of at multiple levels, we want to have that type of collaboration happening. If it's if they're really mismatched in terms of level, that can make collaboration a little bit trickier. And if there is, for example, a lot of organizations out there might have the role of product management, but they report very low in the organization to lower level business leaders, right? So they're not peered, they're peered, but you have to go kind of up and around rather than there being sort of a central leader of product management. That's the other kind of attribute we're looking for. Becomes particularly important on that dimension of how you solve problems, because if you don't have people living at that level, it's nearly impossible to stitch all of that together and create a cohesive strategy across the product line.
That's interesting. Jim?
Well, before we hit record, we were kind of talking about, do organizations have to restructure, move people around? And when you mentioned durable teams earlier, and now these, bringing these people together of engineering and product, I'm curious if I'm making the right mental connections, in that we may not change who somebody's reporting to, like a reporting structure, but are there changes that you're regularly recommending about functional organization of people and teams, or are you largely able to do this with zero changes to this definition of my team, and this is my team, my department, my product, etc.?
Yeah, I realized we had a conversation. I probably didn't tell the whole story there because I was assuming sort of a different starting point. It depends, right? It does depend on what a company has going on. If you don't have a role, one of the key competencies, something like product management, or maybe you've got product owners who are reporting up to various parts of the engineering organization, but not real product managers. If a competency is just lacking, that is going to require a change to the org chart. Furthermore, if a competency is completely atomized and fragmented, that may require a change to the org chart. Very few of the companies I deal with are at that, starting from that level. Most of them have at least the competency is nominally identified within the organization, and there is some leadership hierarchy around that particular competency. And when that is the case, usually there's a lot that can be done without having to disturb the org chart. at least initially, that it's they're, they may come to that conclusion themselves, that they do have to move things around. But, I certainly wouldn't come out swinging that this is a prerequisite. But that is different from those other cases that I was talking about. If a competency is completely lacking, or if there's no clear leadership hierarchy for that particular competency.
Now, I'd get taken out behind the old woodshed if I didn't ask this follow-up question, since you just mentioned it. How do you define the difference between product ownership and product management? Because it sounds like you just talked about them as very different things. And this is a daily question, I think, for Sundar and I.
Yeah, it's a big difference, and I may be stepping on some landmines here, either with you guys or your audience. But yeah, how we've always looked at it is we see product ownership as a role in a process. Typically it's a role in a process like Scrum or something like that, right? They have certain duties that they're supposed to do in order to keep that process moving forward. Product management it's that and a lot more, right? So it typically involves really you're discovering products on behalf of your customers that work for the business. That is a product manager's job. So as such, you are intimately concerned with the value of what the team is creating, not just doing what a stakeholder is asking you to do, not just what cooking up some requirements, but actually finding the right solution, one that's going to be valuable for the customer and one that's going to be viable for the business. So there's just a huge amount in that. We typically see the extent to which there is a product owner, it is the product manager, but it might be 15% of their job. The rest of it is a lot of other stuff, right? Working cross-functionally, working with stakeholders, getting in front of customers, interviews, user tests, looking at data, all of these sorts of things. One of the things that is particularly problematic, so some companies, like, they'll call it product owner when it really is a product manager. Sometimes they'll have product managers when they really are kind of a product owner. We're really trying to up-level the definition of what a product manager is. One of the real big problems that we really try and avoid is when companies have both. It's like, okay, we've got product managers and we have product owners. We got all the best of both worlds, right? And that introduces a number of problems itself. Not the least of which is, okay, who's in charge? What are we actually building? It also can create a little bit of us and them between product management and engineering. I've seen product owners be out there. It's like, our job is to protect the engineers, right? And I hate that. Whenever I hear that, I also hate. Okay, we're product, we're the what, and we're the why, and you're engineering and you're the how. I hate that, right? That is not collaboration. We are all together trying to figure out how to solve this problem that we've been given, and we're all being measured on that. So yes, engineering, you may actually have some of the best ideas as to what we're going to be building. And when you start to decompose into product owners and product managers, you kind of obliterate that whole dynamic, and you really set up this, we're communicating in artifacts to one another, and this is I need better requirements from you, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, that's my answer. We'll see where the bombs land on that one.
Actually, interestingly, and I think I speak for both of us, Jim, everything that you're mentioning now here, what a product manager does, is how we advocate for product owners to be as well. Because being a proxy is pretty much what you're describing as a product owner to be, like someone who takes the orders from, thank you, dear stakeholders. He turns his back to the team again, turns around, and then gives away the orders. Like, there's more command and control, as if there is no decision-making authority, no ownership, actual ownership whatsoever. While as the things that you're describing, what a product manager should be, is in my vision as well as what a product owner should be doing. He's not in service of the stakeholders. He's in service of the value that the product is delivering to whomever the stakeholders are, the users, the stakeholders. And bottom line is just get shit done. Focus on the outcomes. And
yeah.
The only difference to me between a product manager and a product owner is the use of the cadence and the events of Scrum, but that's pretty much it. The activities that he's supposed to do, and looking at data and being very closely related and in relationship with the users and so on, that's all, in my opinion, my humble opinion, who am I to disagree with you, but what a product owner should be doing as well.
So I've got two small things to inject here, and they may be points of agreement or they may be points of disagreement, because most of what you said is, I think we're quite aligned on that. The first thing is, when we talk about the product model and we talk about value and users and customers, stakeholders are not customers. Stakeholders are part of the business. Stakeholders are the business. So we are not serving the stakeholders. We're serving whoever this product is serving, right? And that's obviously a lot easier to see when you've got products and customers that are outside of the company. It gets a little bit more complex when you're doing internal systems, but that's the first thing, is that we're not serving the business. We are serving the customers in a way that works for the business. So, and that little difference of phrase can be pretty profound in terms of the culture of the company. So I would ask, with your definition, does it clear that bar? And if the answer is yes, the second thing I was going to say is, why not call them product managers? Because that's really what the industry is looking for. If you're going to call somebody a product owner and you're going to recruit for that job, you're going to find people who are all wrapped up in their CSPO, right? And that, okay, well, I'm qualified for that job because I'm certified, right? When in fact, you are anything but qualified for that job. That gives you, you understand how the process works, but in terms of doing product discovery, in terms of being given just a problem with no solutions and figuring out the best solution, and prototyping dozens of things in a week, most of which are going to get thrown away, getting them in front of customers, getting them in front of the stakeholders. That's a really different skill set than what typically somebody who has a PO title or a CSPO certification only is going to have.
I fully agree with you. I'm looking at you as well, Jim. I see a nodding. I would agree with everything that you're saying. Now, I'm going to jump into the future with 20 years. Do you think it's going to happen the same thing to a product manager as it's now happening with product owners, or with any term? Like, if we're now going to do whatever you're saying is a product manager is supposed to do you think at some point we're going to get product manager fatigue and we're going to do the exact same thing just with a different name?
It's possible, but I think it's unlikely. And it's the big difference here. Well, first of all, I'll give you an empirical answer, and to say that this definition of a product manager has been around for a lot longer than 20 years. It's what we've been talking about, kind of the essence of what a product manager does. We've tightened up a little bit of the terminology and the conceptual modeling, for what the product model is, but kind of what the product manager is and what they do has been pretty consistent for us. We've definitely not changed it more than 5%, over the last 20 plus years. The other thing is, I think a big part of the demise of product owner, to the extent that there is a demise, is that we're trying to wrap such a tight recipe-based definition around it, and put a certification on it. It's like, you do these 10 things and you learn these 12 things, then we can call you, and you pass this test, we're going to call you a CSPO. And that is the role. I mean, anything like that is bound to have a shelf life. When you kind of keep it much more oriented around what the core principles are within the competency, those are pretty consistent. And I'll go back to the empirical side of things. Even as we've seen massive waves of technology, innovation come through, this idea of what a product manager is really hasn't changed. Kind of what they do hasn't changed. Everybody keeps saying, okay, well, AI is here, generative AI is here, how is it going to affect this job? And of course, there's some things that are happening, but the fundamental principles behind the job, orientation and value, orientation and viability, finding a solution to a problem, being measured as to the effectiveness of that solution, being measured on the outcomes, collaborating cross-functionally with design and engineering, all that stuff stays true.
Interesting. Jim, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm aligned with everything you said. In fact, as you were describing kind of typical product management, I've seen product management and product ownership work well hand in hand. I've seen them definitely be at odds and have conflict. And I've seen the pattern you described, I think, of, I focus on the big picture strategy stuff, the C-level. I go to the conferences, I talk to vendors, suppliers, and all that. And then you just deal with those, geeks and get the work done that I need.
Right. I refer to that, by the way, as the outside game and the inside game, right? The product manager, you're the outside game. Product owner, you're the inside game. And by the way, that starts to work for old IT terminology as well. Like, okay, product manager and business analyst or whatever. Like anytime you're trying to divide it up into the outside game and the inside game.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I interrupted your.
No, I like it. In fact, it was like 5 hours ago today. I used that same idea of, regardless of what we call this person, we need some level of focus inward to the team to solve their issues, to respond to things, to help them with the tactical how. And then we also need an outward focus. And at various times, a single person is likely never going to be able to dedicate enough focus to both of those directions. And, I don't know if there's a good model out there. I do believe that good product managers, in my experience, surround themselves with people who have complementary skills to them. Mm-hmm. One of the best product managers I've observed and been working near knew what their deficiencies were, and they brought data scientists to them. They brought a pricing analyst to them and all that. And I think that's what Sundar and I would support for a product owner too, if that's what a company called those people. Sure. And yeah, I mean, no real reflection or question other than to say yes and. Everything you're seeing and saying, I think we support. It's just, if a company doesn't have maybe mature product ownership and they don't have any or mature product management, it sounds like you would suggest that they don't do both at the same time and that they would instead build a product management skill and capability internally. Yeah. Is that true?
Well, so sort of. I mean, I would say in general, we would coach companies not to build both disciplines, and if they do have both disciplines, to try and collapse them. So, and it's mainly because we don't want to ensconce in the product operating model, here's a group of people who are the inside people, and here's a group of people who are the outside people. And, the job progression is an inside person gets to be a better and more senior inside person, and outside person does the same on the outside. Product management is a holistic job. It involves both of them. So that's the first thing, is you don't want two of them. Now, by the way, this doesn't preclude you from having more and less senior product managers. And maybe an entry-level person may really be really good on the inside game and is still developing on the outside game. And they might be potentially in a support position for a while as needed. But we're really saying there is one competency here, not two competencies. So that's the first thing I'm saying. And I usually make a pretty strong point about that. The second point, this one I would make less strongly, is, okay, if you've got one role, you've really got it down to one, why aren't you calling it product manager? Because, are you calling it product owner because it fundamentally is a product owner and you're coming from the command and control, or are you just calling it a product owner for legacy reasons? And I would, if you guys were one of my customers, I would be asking you the question, what's holding you back, from labeling it this other way? Because I'm telling you from the outside, the optics that you're setting is the optics that set this expectation that it is a more tactical inside sort of job that's associated more with this certification than anything else.
I think that might be a really cool topic to have, like a debate between Silicon Valley Product Group and one of the largest Scrum organizations, see what the answers would be. I would like that. I would love that. I also like to be mindful of both of you gentlemen's time. There's one last question in the audience, and I hope I do not butcher your name. Gautam Aditya asks, can the role of a product owner or product manager be automated in 5 to 10 years? Now, you touched on it a little bit. This is the last question I want to ask you, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah, I don't think so. I do think that there are a lot of tasks that product managers are doing where they're going to get a lot more support, from the AI tools. but just the nature of this job and the level of judgment and the sort of the cross-functional complexity, I actually have more confidence that product manager as a kind of let me put it this way. I would be more comfortable with my kids saying that that's what they wanted to be than them wanting to be an engineer, for example. I think that job is less vulnerable to being automated than many other jobs out there.
Interesting. Chris, there are so many other different things where we could talk about. I would like to pick your brain on numerous topics, but I thank you so much for this past hour. It really flew by to me. It was very, very valuable, and there's so much more that I want to know.
Lots of fun meeting both of you. I really enjoyed it too, and let's do it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
All right.